Hello, my friends. Today, we're going to walk through how to play Fantasy Premier League. If you already know how to play, feel free to join the Gray Hair Gaming League in the description below. Hit that like button and have a great day. This is really targeted towards your brand new players, particularly players if you're from America where you're like, wait, you've just discovered the Premier League. What is this fantasy thing? Is it like the NFL fantasy or baseball fantasy or something like that? That's who my target audience is here today. For the rest of you, let's dig in on the basics. How to fill out your roster, how scoring works, how to change your roster, and how the bonus chips can be used throughout the season. All right, step one, you got to have a roster, right? Makes sense. So this is what it looks like when you first log in after you've signed up to play. You've got, as you can see here, 13 outfield players and 2 goalkeeping slots, 15 players, and you have a budget of £100 million. I've got notes on my other screen here that I'm going to be looking at, so that's why my head's going to be tilted the other way. Each week, you pick a starting 11 because, well, that's how football is played. You have a starting 11. From the available players, you must have 1 goalkeeper, 3 defenders, and at least 1 forward. So that means you could do like 3 defenders, 5 midfielders, 2 forwards. You could do 4 defenders, 5 midfielders, 1 forward. There's a variety of options that you can choose. Each player, as you can see, has a starting value associated with them, but it changes based on how many people are adding or dropping that player throughout the season. And obviously, if you start with 100 million, if you pick up Pope here for 5 million, then now you've got 95 million left to spend on your remaining 14 players, and so on and so forth. You don't have to use the full 100 million, but you probably should get as close as humanly possible. It doesn't do you any good to have an extra million sitting in the bank. It doesn't pay interest to your account or anything like that. Also important to note, something I learned as I played this for the first time last season, is you can only pick 3 players from the same team. So if you're trying to load up on those Manchester United players and field their entire starting 11, which wouldn't even fit from a financial standpoint, but let's just say it could, that won't work. You can only pick 3 from each team, including those players that are sitting on your bench. So now that you got the basics there, you literally just have to go through and start picking players. So let's say you want to go a little more inexpensive on the goalkeeper front, maybe like a kicker in NFL fantasy where it's like, the kicker's kind of last. I'm not saying I agree with that strategy, but let's just say you wanted to. You come in here, you can click on the eye for information. You can look at their previous points in their previous seasons, the minutes played, because obviously you want someone who's going to play a lot. How many clean sheets they had. If they're a goalkeeper, that's how many times they went an entire game without giving up a goal. Obviously, goals scored and assists would be quite impressive from the goalkeeping position. Goals conceded, all these kinds of stats. You can look at their upcoming fixtures. And this rating, FDR, is fixture difficulty rating. You want it to be as close to 1 as possible. Now, that is a subjective thing provided to you by Fantasy Premier League. So they're saying, playing Wolves away from home is a 2. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think Wolverhampton is going to come in and smash the league this season, and playing them at their home ground in the first game of the season might not be the best idea. But you can kind of take a look at that to see, if this was your starting set of games, that's pretty difficult. A 5-3-2, 5-4, you might not pick Jordan Pickford. So let's say you go, okay, looks pretty good. All right. You close that out. You come back over to Pickford and you click add player. Now he's added to your roster. You go through and you do that for every position. You'll notice we now have 95 million in the bank. So I've got 14 slots, 95 million. So there's different strategies. You might go really cheap on your bench players to be able to afford your starting 11 to be more expensive. You might have players you rotate in and out, but that's the very basics. You go through, I'm not going to show you picking 15 different players because that's insanity. So that's the very basics. I'm just going to do auto pick here so you can see, okay, boom, we've got an entire roster now. We got Pickford, Ederson, Mendy, Walker, Rose, all these players, right? Great, looks good. Now, let's talk about how scoring works. All right, scoring obviously is going to have a major impact on who you pick, why you pick them, and what strategy you go when you're building your first team at the start of the season. So each of the 4 positions here is scored differently. So you've got goalkeepers. Obviously, they're not going to score a ton of goals, so that probably is going to be scored differently, right? So just like in NFL or baseball, where your quarterback gets points for throwing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns, but sometimes it's different than, say, your tight end or your running back. Same thing here. Your goalkeeper, your defender, your midfielder, your forward are all going to be scored slightly differently. Now, I'm going to show you how to get to the scoring section, and we're going to walk through some of these things. So you click on the help button up here, and then you go to rules and come down to scoring. So let's talk through some of this, because there are some aspects of scoring that apply to every player regardless of position. So we're going to start there. So if your player plays at all in a game, they get a point. If they play 1 minute, and they come out in the first minute because they get injured, they're going to get a point. If they're on for more than 60 minutes, they get an extra point. I think it's a little strange how it's worded here. So if we're playing 60 minutes or more, you get 2 points. It's not 1 plus 2 points for a total of 3 points. You can get a maximum of 2 points for playing in the game, just being in the game. So if your player goes 61 minutes, that's a point for playing the first 60 and a point for playing after the 60, right? So 2 points total. So you want players that are going to play at least 60 minutes versus those players that are going to be, subbing in 20 minutes at the end of the game, unless you think that player is going to score a lot of goals. So you get 2 points for that. Assists, regardless of position on the field, net you 3 points. Penalty misses, regardless of the position on the field, subtract 2 points from the player's score. So if they get selected to take the penalty and they miss, or it's blocked or whatever, that's a -2 points. Bonus points, which are based off of stats that FPL tracks. Essentially, it's trying to track who had the most influence on the game. It has things like, if you avoided tackles or if you got tackled, and it subtracts and adds throughout the entire game for both teams. Whoever, even if you're on the losing team, if your player had the most bonus points, they get 3 points. If your player had the second most bonus points, they get 2 points, and then third, 1 point. If there's a tie, each player gets the same amount, blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of take a look at that. Those rules are down here. How is it calculated? I'm not going to walk through all of that with you because it's very, very long. But that's how you see those rules. Let's go back to the general scoring. And of course, yellow cards, red cards, and own goals don't take position into account. If your goalkeeper gets sent off, they're going to get a red card. That's -3 points. Doesn't matter the position. As you can see, though, there are categories that score differently based on the position of the player. So a goal by a defender, even by the goalkeeper, is worth 6 points, compared to 5 for midfielders and 4 for forwards, because you would expect your forwards to score more than your defenders and your midfielders for most teams. Clean sheets pay 6 points to goalkeepers and defenders, meaning as long as they were on the pitch for 60 minutes, right? They had to be on the pitch for 60 minutes, and they weren't sent off for a red card, you get 6 points if your team didn't give up a goal. So that's an interesting thing, where if the player plays consistently 70 minutes, and maybe their team concedes a lot in the 80th minute, but they play 70 minutes and they're substituted off and they kept a clean sheet, your player still gets the 6 points, because if they concede a goal after they've left the game, well, that's not their fault. So you get the 6 points for that. So the scoring system provides an array of options for you to pick your strategy, right? So maybe you're going to go after a defender who maybe their team gives up 1 goal a game, right? So, you lose a point if your team gives up 2 goals, but so they give up, consistently a goal a game, but they are more involved in the attack. They're more likely to, they're like Maguire heading something home from a defensive standpoint, or they're, I'm just thinking of the England national team. So Trippier with the assists on a set piece. So maybe you pick that player, even though their team might concede more goals. Maybe they're making up for that by getting more points for scoring goals or assists. So it gives you different variations. Again, you can put different numbers of players in each position on the field, right? So maybe you go a midfielder heavy roster because the midfielders you pick are more likely to score goals than some forwards, like a Mo Salah, right? So Mo Salah technically counts as a midfielder. So maybe that adjusts your strategy and who you end up spending your money on. So again, you can see all the various areas here that provide scoring opportunities. Goalkeepers that save 3 shots, they get a point. They save 6 shots, they get 2 points. So maybe they're on a team that has a leaky defense, but they're a really good goalkeeper and they block a lot of shots. They might end up conceding some goals, but maybe they're picking up points and potentially bonus points for making those saves. So that's just a very brief thing on how scoring works. Another aspect of scoring you have to take into account is you get to select 1 captain and 1 vice captain. Well, what does that mean? All it means is the player you select as captain, if they play, whatever points they generate in their game or throughout that game week, sometimes there's 2 games in a week, but whatever points they generate during the game week are doubled. So if they play 10 minutes and they come out with an injury and they only get 1 point, you double it, you get 2. Versus they score a bunch of goals and get some assists and whatever, you could get 40 points because it got doubled from 20. Things like that. The vice captain is essentially if your captain doesn't play. So you're anticipating your captain playing and they pull their hamstring, before the match, and they're not in the starting 11. They don't get substituted in, so they're not there. Okay, well, your vice captain steps up and takes that role, and so the vice captain's points would be doubled. That also goes into play with, you can only have 11 of your 15 here on the pitch at one time. So you're always going to have 1 goalkeeper on the bench and 3 other players. Again, who those 3 players are depends on if they're how many people you've got out on. So if you've got 5 defenders out, then you're not going to have a defender on the bench. If you've got 5 midfielders, you're not going to have a midfielder on the bench. So you can essentially rank on your bench who you want to come in first, and it's just by where you put them in the order. And so if, let's say, your captain doesn't play and your captain is Marcus Rashford, and you only had Rashford and Tosin starting, and Giroud was on your bench and he was the first player on the bench, he would be substituted in Rashford's spot. Otherwise, it would be one of the other players. So it's not necessarily going to be like for like, where a striker comes on for a striker or a midfielder comes on for a midfielder. It depends on your formation and which players you have selected to be the first, second, and third backups. So that's another way. If your captain doesn't play, the vice captain still takes the captaincy for the doubling of the points, but you can still get points by one of your bench players being substituted on automatically. That's a major difference from other fantasy sports, is it happens automatically. You don't have to go, oh man, they didn't come on. It automatically happens. So those times when you played fantasy football in terms of NFL, and it turns out your player is injured in practice and doesn't end up playing, and you're going, I wish I'd known that. You can have that person in your starting 11, and if they don't play, they get automatically substituted out. Here's what it looks like after you've entered. All I had to do was enter my team name and pick my favorite team, yada, yada, yada. You can design your own kit. I don't think this is used for anything, but I kind of think it's kind of funny. So you can see the C here for Rashford and the V on Pickford. So Pickford is my backup captain, essentially. He's the vice captain. If I wanted to change to Giroud, then I click on him and I just go make captain. And I click Rashford and I say make vice captain. So that's how you do that. In terms of setting your lineup, if you didn't want Giroud to start, you want Tosin to start, you click the essentially the substitution arrow and swap them in. Or if I want to change my formation and I want 3 midfielders and 3 strikers, you can do that. Again, you have to have at least 3 defenders and 1 forward playing at any time. Aside from that, you can do as you like. Same thing here with the bench. If I wanted Keita to be first here, he would be my first substitute. So first substitute, second substitute, third. Goalkeeper, obviously, he's going to automatically sub in if for some reason your goalkeeper doesn't start. Coming down here, we have these bonus chips, is what they're called. So essentially, in every season, you can play this once. There is another one called a wild card. We'll talk about that in a second. But to start the season, you can do a bench boost, which, as you can see, the points scored by your bench count in the game week. So if you have a really strong starting 11 and you're like, I can't take any of these players out, I think they're going to score a lot of points, but you think the same thing about your bench players, you're like, oh, I wish I could put all of them on the pitch. You can with the bench boost if kind of the schedules align and you think they're all going to have really strong games. You can only use that once in an entire season, though. A free hit is you can make unlimited changes to your roster, which we'll talk about here in a second. That's a massive part of the game, in a single game week, and then it reverts back to how it was. So let's say you get into some of the December, January timeframe where some of your players don't have games, or there's 2 games in a week because there was an FA Cup game or something like that, and you want to take advantage of those double header weeks, because if a team's got 2 games and Rashford plays twice for Manchester United, he gets points in both those games. So you're trying to take advantage of that. You could change your entire roster and not have to worry about how much it is going to cost you to do that, as long as you're under the 100 million, right, in your bank balance. And then the next game week, it reverts back as if you made no transfer. So it's just like a one-time, changes many things as you want, and then it goes back to how you had it. Okay? And then triple captain, as you might expect, instead of doubling your captain's points, it triples them for that game week. Now, there's a thing called a wild card, which you get twice a season. Once in the first half of the season, once in the second half of the season. I want to say the first half is through like December 29th at a certain time period. Again, it's in the rules section. You could take a look at it. But what that allows you to do is it's like the free hit where you can make as many changes to your roster as you want, except they're permanent changes. And so let's talk about transfers next. So you are allowed to make a certain number of transfers in a given week. And again, you have to stay within your budget. So you see down here, my budget's $98.5 million currently in the squad. That's the players I have on my team. And I've got $1.5 million in the bank. So if I want to make a change, let's say I don't want to keep Danny Rose, whose value is currently £6 million. I can drop Danny Rose for somebody else. Okay, so he's $6 million. I drop him here. You see my money remaining goes to $7.5 million instead of $1.5 million because I've gained the $6 million from Danny Rose. Now I could go find another defender. Let's say Alonso. I like Alonso. And let's add him in. So now I've added him in. My money remaining is $1 million because he was 6.5 off of the 7.5. So that's easy enough. But the thing is, you can only make one transfer a week without it charging you. So if let's say we're in week 3 and I want to change my entire back line, I can make one change for free. The other ones cost me I think it's 2 points. So here it is. It's 4 points. It deducts 4 points from your score after each free transfer. So, and you can roll one transfer over in a given week. So week 2, you don't use your transfer. Week 3, you would have 2 free transfers, but you can't roll over more than that. So you will have no more than 2 free transfers in a given week. And so let's say I had 2 free transfers and I want to swap out all 5 of my defenders because they're just terrible. Okay, well 2 of those would be free. The other 3 would cost me 4 points each. So that's minus 12 points to my score. So I'd have to be really convinced that they were going to make up the difference with their performance in that given game week. So with the wild card, you could change all 15 players if you wanted, and it wouldn't matter how it wouldn't deduct any points from you. A massive part about transfers and building your roster is the value of the player, which seems simple enough, right? Well, they've got a value. But again, that value is going to go up or down based on really their performance on the pitch, but really on top of that, people's perception of their performance on the pitch. So let's take Mo Salah last season, right? So he came in, in 2014-15, which was a while ago, he had 3 points and 33 minutes played. So I'm guessing, I don't even remember what his value was to start the season. I'm guessing it wasn't 13 million. It might have been more like 8 or something like that because he's playing for Liverpool and all those kinds of expectations. So if you picked him up at 8 million at the beginning part of the season and he starts scoring a ton of points, his value is going to go up to where if somebody else in your league wanted to buy him and didn't have him on their roster, they're going to have to pay more money than you did. So now you have an advantage. So let's say his value goes all the way from 8 million to 13 million. Now you could drop him as a transfer, and instead of going from 1.5 to 9.5 with your cost, right? If your cost was 8 million, you get 13 million, which now gives you flexibility to try and buy another better player. So maybe you think, hey, he's kind of peaked. I'm trying to buy low, sell high. You think he's kind of peaked, you could sell him and pick up another player or, 2 players, or combining, you could drop, 2 different players to pick up one really good player and one player. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into where you think the values are going to go. And if they're having a poor run of form, their value will go down, which again means if you dropped them, let's say Mo Salah starts off at 13 million this season and he has a really poor first 10 games, and his value goes all the way to 8 million, which I think would be aggressive, but let's just go with it. Then if you dropped him, you couldn't pick up another 13 million player. You'd have to pick up an 8 million player or whatever you had in your bank balance. So that is a massive part of transfers and how the game is played, especially considering you have to balance. You can only really make 1 or potentially 2 free transfers in a given game week. So you can't make widespread changes without it impacting your points. That's where looking at the upcoming fixtures, or if you're looking at, say, a specific player, and you're looking at the fixtures and going, okay, if I picked him up now, when would I drop him? Would I drop him if I picked up Salah now? Would I drop him after the Leicester game before he plays Spurs and Chelsea and Manchester City? Is he worth keeping on my roster on the bench during those games? Stuff like that. So you kind of have to be able to project into the future and look at their various upcoming games and whether you think, one, they're going to start, and two, if they're going to be able to score a lot of points in those games. Because if they don't, you're going to have to drop them and their value could go up or down based on how their season is going. So that's a massive part of the game. All right, my friends, I think I'm going to leave it there. I've got to go change my roster now. Do not auto pick. That is the only strategy tip I'm going to give you. You probably don't want to pick up any other strategy tips from me, but do not auto pick. So you need to think about that. Join the league. The code is going to be in the description below. I've also set up a specific Discord channel. It's the Fantasy Premier League channel inside the GHG community Discord. So come check that out. Come say hello. And again, I haven't figured out what kind of a prize we're going to do. I'm sure we'll figure something out as a community. It's a long season, so we've got time to figure that out. Also, check out this stuff over here and hit that like button. Leave a comment if you want to see additional Fantasy Premier League content from me. I'm not an expert at it, but I think we can have some fun with it. So I appreciate you watching, and hopefully this helps you play the game. We'll see you next time.